The excitement of Antonio Brown's upcoming season with the Oakland Raiders has been put on hold because of a pretty wild story. As you've probably heard by now, Brown suffered what they're calling significant frostbite to the bottom of his feet after an incident with a cryotherapy treatment. Welcome back, everybody. For those new to my page, my name's Brian and I'm a doctor and a sports fan, and it's my goal here to use those two interests to explain different sports injuries and sports medicine topics in a way that's easier for you all to understand. Today we're going to be talking all about these pictures of Antonio Brown's feet, particularly what's going on with frostbite, why something like this happened, and any clues about what could be going on in these pictures. The NFL season is finally starting to get underway, and so if you like this type of content, make sure you guys go subscribe to my channel because we'll be bringing you a lot more football content here now that the season's about to get started. But for now, let's dive into it, talking all about Antonio Brown's feet and frostbite. The first report we got on this was that Brown had been wearing improper footwear in this cryotherapy chamber. For those that don't know, these chambers are these big areas that subject your body to really intense cold temperatures for a very brief period of time. There's really not that much good scientific evidence behind these, but the belief is that it helps promote healing and reduce inflammation. Most of the time, the way they work is by using liquid nitrogen to provide that really cool air to the body. The fact that this involved the entire undersurface of his feet makes me think that there was probably some direct contact between some really cold surface. Later on, they reported there was a mishap with the machine, so maybe some liquid nitrogen spilled or something that got on the bottom of his feet. But either way, this looks more like the result of direct cold contact as opposed to just the cold air from the chamber itself. Let's dive in next to the anatomy of the skin to explain what we see in these pictures, and then talk about what exactly is happening with frostbite. There's two general layers to skin to think about. On top, we have the epidermis, and then below that, we have the dermis. If we zoom in more closely to the epidermis, this is really what we think of as the outer layer of our skin. These skin cells initially start deeper down in that layer of the epidermis and then migrate up towards the surface of the skin. Ultimately, that top layer of skin is actually dead skin cells that gradually slough off over time and get replaced by new skin cells from deep below. What happens with frostbite is, depending on the severity, various levels of the skin get affected and result in what we actually see in terms of symptoms. To understand what's going on with frostbite, we have to zoom in and look at an individual cell. We have our cell membrane surrounding it, and then we have our extracellular space and our intracellular space. Both of these areas contain water. In fact, the majority of our body is composed of water. Whenever our body is exposed to extreme cold, this water begins to freeze and crystallize. In the initial phases, this water in the extracellular space outside of the cell is the first to crystallize and turn into little ice crystals. That causes a number of bad outcomes. One in particular is it can actually mechanically shear or disrupt those cell membrane protective walls. The other thing it does is whenever these ice crystals form, the body thinks that there's not enough water outside of the cell. And so to try to balance and get that equilibrium back, water moves from inside the cell to outside the cell. This causes the inner portion of the cell to get dehydrated, which can be harmful and cause cell death. As the temperature continues to drop even more, then the water that's inside the cell starts to crystallize as well. Once again, you get the same sort of effects. If you imagine a bag full of a bunch of icicles, eventually those icicles can poke through the wall of the bag and cause that membrane to disrupt and then cause the cell to die. Now, at the same time as this is happening, our body is trying to control the heat that's delivered to and from these vital structures to try and at least salvage what it can. What the body does is go through this alternating phase of constricting the blood vessels and then relaxing the blood vessels to sort of alter how much blood is getting to and from that cold area. This is referred to as the hunting reaction, and can only go on for so long before eventually everything just constricts down. This is what causes the really severe black fingers that we see in the necrosis that can be so damaging with frostbite. Once that blood flow completely shuts off, you don't have vital oxygen and nutrients delivered to those tissues, and that causes cell death or tissue necrosis. That ultimately leads to this black color we see with fingers and toes and can lead to them falling off or needing to be amputated. Going back to the pictures of Brown's feet here, we can see it looks like there might have been somewhat of a blister or kind of fluid-filled pocket in that space that initially formed. I suspect that's why it now looks like this is kind of peeling away. There was probably fluid under this area. That fluid popped or came out, and now that skin is just starting to resolve like a blister. And there's a reason for why you get these blisters in the case of frostbite. Remember earlier I was talking about how these ice crystals form within the layers of the tissue whenever they're subjected to cold. Well, now you've got all of these ice crystals underneath the skin but no cell structure to hold them all in place. So after the cold exposure is gone and your body starts to warm back up, that causes those ice crystals to all start to melt. This contributes to a lot of swelling and edema and fluid accumulation under the skin, and that fluid needs somewhere to go. What happens when blisters form is that fluid makes its way up to the surface of the skin and gets contained under a layer of that outer skin and forms a blister. I would totally expect that Antonio Brown will be fully recovered in time for the start of the season. If it were a really severe frostbite injury, by the time he shared these photos, we would have seen a lot worsening features on the images. So I suspect the reason he's not playing yet is just because this probably is pretty uncomfortable and painful, as this outer layer of the epidermis is sort of sloughing off and peeling away. That underneath layer that's coming back up takes some time to get conditioned and used to all that repetitive cutting and movement that he's putting on it, so that's probably why it's just a little bit still uncomfortable. So as long as he's wearing proper gloves, proper shoes back in these cryotherapy chambers, I really don't foresee this being any sort of a long-term issue, but definitely a learning point for him and hopefully for you guys out there watching. Thanks as always, and until next time, we'll see you later.